Mike didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw either roar of the dirt bike, the destruction of his peaceful yard, the mocking smile on Chase's face, and the venom in Karen's tone. What ate at him more than the damage was the blatant injustice of it all. Karen hadn't just refused to take responsibility, she had laughed in his face. In front of her roses, beneath her manicured hedges, she'd declared open war. He reviewed the footage on his security cameras, over and over. It was crystal clear. The dirt bike flew across the grass, Chase's face fully visible under the helmet's open visor. He even did a wheelie right before tearing through the koi pond. Mike had timestamps, high-definition angles, and audio. Next morning, he called the police. The officer who showed up was polite but uninterested. Property damage is a civil matter unless there's a serious threat, the cop said with a shrug. And even then, if the kid's under 18, but I have proof, Mike insisted. Video, audio, everything. The officer glanced at the footage but didn't even finish watching before saying, best bet is to talk to your HOA. Try to resolve it internally. If that doesn't work, small claims court. Mike felt the burn in his gut. Karen was the HOA she'd twist a story, and everyone on the board would believe her. Still, he followed procedure. He emailed the footage to the HOA board with a formal complaint, stating he expected compensation for the damages totaling $6,200, including labor, materials, and koi replacement. 2 days later, he got a response. HOA ruling complaint against Chase reviewed. After reviewing your submission and considering neighborhood feedback, the board has decided no action will be taken at this time. Please ensure future landscaping elements do not interfere with common use pathways or pose risks to neighborhood children. Thank you. Risk. Mike barked at his monitor. He read it again and again, stunned. Common use pathways. That's my yard. He knew exactly what Karen had done. Twisted the facts, used the board she handpicked, and painted him as some sort of angry loner. And now, on top of having his yard destroyed, he was the problem. The next day, as if to twist the knife, Chase rode his dirt bike again. This time, he revved it at the edge of Mike's lawn, spraying dust into the air and laughing like he owned the place. Mike stepped outside and stood silently, arms crossed, until Chase finally drove off. That night, Mike walked the perimeter of his property. He stared at the broken stones, the deep tire tracks, the empty pond. One of the fish had somehow survived, flopping in the mud near a broken lily. Mike gently scooped it up and put it in a bucket, heart heavy. He looked at the garden he built, now ruined. And then at Karen's house, windows glowing softly in the distance, like eyes watching him. Something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about a garden anymore. Karen had made it personal. She'd humiliated him, weaponized her authority, and let her son destroy what he loved. And now she expected him to roll over and accept it. She thought she'd won. But Mike wasn't done. Not by a long shot. He opened his shed, reached for the dusty lockbox at the back. Inside were plans, receipts, HOA by us, and something more dangerous than a lawsuit. A plan was forming, and Karen wouldn't see it coming. Mike wasn't the kind of man to pick fights. But once someone came into his world and lit a match, he didn't just put out the fire, he rebuilt the house with flamethrowers. That night, after salvaging what little he could from his ravaged yard, he stayed up at his kitchen table with a pot of stale coffee and a dusty binder labeled HOA Rules and Bylaws. It was a relic from when he first moved in, one he'd never thought he'd need. But now, every page was a loaded weapon. Karen had power because people assumed she did. She'd been on the board for 7 years, uncontested, unbothered, and unchallenged. Her word was law because no one questioned her, but Mike had already seen cracks in her castle. And now, he was ready to widen them by sunrise. Mike had highlighted every violation, every loophole, and every forgotten bylaw that Karen had ignored. He didn't just want revenge, he wanted proof. The kind no board could dismiss. He started small. First, he requested copies of HOA meeting minutes for the last 2 years. Under Article 5, Section C, any homeowner could demand public access. Karen delayed it, of course. Said the files were being reorganized. But Mike had already anticipated that. He sent a certified request letter with a 7-day legal deadline. She ignored it, so he filed a complaint with the state's HOA oversight board.ben. He contacted the county records office. He found something she didn't expect anyone to notice. Karen's position as president had technically expired 8 months ago, but no one on the board had enforced term limits. She'd just kept going. Signed HOA checks, issued warnings, approved budgets. All of it. Illegal. Mike grinned to himself. He wasn't just going to make her pay for what Chase did. He was going to strip her of the throne she built on lies. But revenge doesn't come without risk. That afternoon, he returned home to find a citation taped to his door. A thick red notice in bold letters, unapproved structural changes, fine. Pending, it claimed, as pond stones extended into common easement space. A total fabrication. But worse was the second notice below it. Aggressive behavior toward minors, formal warning. That was the kill shot. Karen was setting him up. If the board labeled him as a threat to neighborhood children, his entire complaint could be discredited. He clenched the letter so hard it tore in his hand. So this was her next move: character assassination. Make him look like the dangerous loner, the paranoid neighbor, the unstable one. Mike needed allies. Fast. He spent the weekend knocking on doors, not with anger, but with humility. He showed the footage, explained what had happened. Many neighbors, already frustrated with iron grip, were surprised how polite and level-headed Mike was. Some had their own stories: petty citations, suspicious HOA charges, threats veiled as reminders. One woman whispered, "I didn't even know we could vote her out." That was the moment Mike knew. The neighborhood was ripe. They didn't need a hero, they just needed a spark. On Sunday evening, Mike stood in his garage, staring at the printed image of Chase on the dirt bike midair, sailing over Mike's lilies like a conquering tyrant. He pinned it to the corkboard, next to a calendar. 7 days, that's all it would take. 7 days until the next HOA meeting. 7 days to build a case strong enough to collapse. Karen's kingdom, she thought the garden was the only thing she destroyed. She had no idea she'd just planted the seeds of her own downfall. Mike wasn't just preparing a complaint anymore, he was preparing a takedown over the next few days. His garage transformed into a war room. Charts, printouts, highlighters. He created timelines of incidents, categorized neighbors, testimonials, and assembled HOA documents like they were blueprints to Karen's downfall. The corkboard above his workbench held everything: Chase's dirt bike photo, emails from the HOA, clips from the security cam footage, and copies of Karen's suspicious financial reports. But Mike knew paper evidence wasn't enough. He needed undeniable proof. Video, audio, witnesses. He'd already seen how easily Karen twisted the truth, how the board would swallow her lies if they weren't spoon-fed reality. So he went a step further. First, he upgraded his security cameras. Instead of just filming his yard, he installed new discreet ones along his property edges, facing outward, all perfectly legal in his state. Then he bought 2 discreet audio recorders, one he hid near his mailbox, and the other beneath the HOA meeting bench just outside the clubhouse, where Karen and her minions often gathered to gossip like suburban mafia bosses. Then he waited. 3 days before the HOA meeting, Karen gave him exactly what he needed. It started with a knock on the door. Not a polite one, a commanding one. Mike opened it to find Karen standing there, arms crossed, wearing her signature smug smile. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past him like she owned the house. Mike didn't stop her. The hallway camera was rolling. "I've been patient," she said, looking around with disgust. "But your behavior is escalating. Harassing board members, recording conversations, whispering lies to neighbors. Do you know what happens to people who try to stir up dissent in a neighborhood like this?" Mike raised an eyebrow. "You threatening me in my own home?" She smiled wider. "Of course not, Mike. But if something unfortunate were to happen, like, say, another citation, or maybe a community vote to restrict certain unstable residents from speaking at meetings, well, that wouldn't be my fault. Are you admitting you're behind these fake warnings?" Mike asked calmly. Karen leaned in, close enough for the mic to catch every word. "I'm just saying, I don't lose. Not in this neighborhood." Then she turned and walked out like she'd won something, but she'd already lost. Mike backed up the footage immediately. A direct threat, caught in his home, delivered by the head of the HOA. He even caught her face clearly in the reflection of the hallway mirror. The smile, the arrogance. The next day, Chase struck again, but this time, Mike was ready. The cameras caught the teenager hurling 2 bags of mulch over Mike's fence and stomping on a row of newly replanted ferns. Then he flipped off the lens and walked back to his house as if nothing had happened. Mike didn't call the police this time. He didn't file a report. He just copied the footage to a flash drive. 2 nights before the meeting, he met quietly with 3 other neighbors, people who had shared stories of Karen's tyranny. Together, they drafted a motion to call an emergency election and demanded a forensic audit of the HOA's budget. Mike would speak at the meeting. The others would second his proposal. The trap was set, but Mike wasn't naive. He knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. He knew there'd be one last strike, something dramatic, something desperate. And he was right, because the night before the meeting, someone snuck onto Mike's property under cover of darkness and cut the wires to his security system. Only what they didn't know was Mike had installed a backup camera hidden in the birdhouse above his porch, and it caught everything. It was just after 2 a.m. when Mike heard the faint click. He had always been a light sleeper. Years of solo contracting work on sketchy job sites had trained him to notice every creak, every unnatural sound. But this one wasn't inside the house. It came from the yard. A soft snap, like someone clipping wire. Rolled out of bed silently. He didn't bother turning on lights. He knew how to move through his home without a sound. He slipped to the hallway mount. Instead, the front cam showed a black screen. Same for the side yard. All down but the birdhouse cam. Still recording. He tapped his laptop, pulled up the backup stream, and there it was, grainy, shadowy footage of a figure hunched by the side fence, bolt cutters glinting under the moonlight, a hoodie, gloved hands, silent steps. The figure moved deliberately, yanking out a junction box Mike had installed to run the upgraded system. The camera caught the person's face for only a second when they turned to check the street. It was Chase. Mike sat back, heart steady, not surprised, but furious. They weren't just toying with him now, they were trying to erase the evidence. This wasn't a prank anymore. This was criminal. And Karen had clearly sent her son to do the dirty work. By morning, Mike had already installed a replacement junction box and rerouted his cables. His yard was online again. He emailed the footage to his attorney, 3 trusted neighbors, and a private HOA watchdog forum he'd joined the week before. Then he printed stills, labeled them, filed them neatly in a black binder. Karen had made this personal, but now it was evidence. By late afternoon, the neighborhood buzzed with quiet tension. Word had spread Mike was going to speak at the HOA meeting. Some rolled their eyes, others whispered support. A few seemed genuinely curious to see what he was planning. Karen, meanwhile, went on a charm offensive posting in the neighborhood Facebook group about community, unity, and reminding residents that disruptive individuals would be asked to leave the meeting if they violated decorum. Mike read it all and smiled. He didn't plan to yell. He didn't need to. At 6:58 p.m., Mike arrived at the HOA clubhouse with his black binder tucked under one arm and his voice recorder in his coat pocket. The building, usually half empty during monthly meetings, was packed. Even neighbors who hadn't shown up in years had dragged out folding chairs. Mike noticed a few security guards near the door. Karen's doing. No doubt. Karen stood at the front of the room like she was hosting a gala. Expensive scarf? Pearl earrings? That smile, the smug one, the I run this place smile. She called the meeting to order with a delicate tap of her pen on a glass. Mike didn't speak right away. He let her go through the motions: budget approvals, a landscaping update, some nonsense about seasonal decorations. Then, when Karen asked if anyone had new business to bring up, Mike raised his hand. Her smile twitched. "You have 3 minutes," she said. Mike nodded, stood, and calmly placed his binder on the podium. "I won't take more than I need," he said, "but I think the neighborhood deserves to see what its HOA leadership has been up to." He opened the binder and began. One photo at a time, one receipt at a time, one recording at a time. The room went silent. You could hear someone's soda fizzing in the back row. And then, Mike dropped the final piece. A still frame of Chase cutting the wires. Karen stood up abruptly, face pale, lips tightening. "This is absurd," she hissed. But Mike looked straight at her and said, "Loud enough for everyone to hear, then you won't mind if I play the video." The room was frozen. Mike didn't speak. He didn't have to. The screen behind him came alive as he hit play. And what played was undeniable. Chase, clad in a hoodie, bolt cutters in hand, reaching into Mike's property in the dead of night and snipping wires like he was defusing a bomb. The timestamp was bold. The camera caught his face clear as daylight right before he turned and ran. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few murmurs followed, but what really landed was the silence from Karen. Her hand gripped the table like she was trying to hold on to reality itself. "Chase was caught on my private backup system installed legally. By the way, sabotaging my security cameras," Mike said evenly. "I submitted this footage to local law enforcement this morning." Someone in the back clapped. It was awkward, nervous, but it cracked the room. Mike continued, voice unwavering. "This isn't just about a kid on a dirt bike or some landscaping. This is about how this HOA has enabled harassment, covered up misconduct, and weaponized authority against homeowners." He flipped to the next tab in the binder chart of Karen's spending. Over the last year, nearly $4,300 was charged to the HOA budget under the vague label of landscaping consultation. Yet, according to the county assessor's office, none of those changes were made on public or shared spaces. They were done strangely enough on the side yard of Karen's vacation home, 40 minutes from here. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Mike wasn't done. "This is a copy of the HOA charter. Signed when this neighborhood was first formed. It clearly states that board officers serve 2-year terms, renewable only through election. Karen's last official term ended 9 months ago. Since then, there have been no ballots, no announcements, no procedural votes. She just stayed in charge." The murmurs turned into full-blown conversations now. People glanced at each other, flipping through the handouts Mike had passed out before the meeting: hard copies of the documents, itemized lists, screenshots of emails, budget charts. A man near the front stood. "Is this true?" he asked Karen directly. "Have you really been president illegally this whole time?" Karen finally spoke. "These accusations are ridiculous. I've volunteered more hours for this neighborhood than anyone in this room. And this attack was orchestrated by someone who has a grudge over a couple of flowers and some fish." Mike stepped away from the projector. Focused. "I didn't orchestrate anything. I just collected the facts." Another neighbor spoke up. "My daughter got fined for a pink tricycle being on the porch." "A tricycle? You said it was a safety hazard." "Someone else? You threatened to tow my car because the paint was faded?" The room had turned fully. Karen tried to regain control, but her voice trembled. "This isn't a courtroom. This is a community meeting. You don't get to stand here and make wild accusations." Mike walked back to the podium and calmly laid down one final document. "This is a petition, signed by 18 homeowners, more than enough to trigger a special election under Article 9 of the Charter, effective immediately. We're calling for a vote to dissolve the current board and appoint an interim leadership committee pending a full audit. Karen stared at the paper like it was a knife. You don't have the authority, she snapped. Mike smiled quietly, powerfully. I didn't. But we do. Someone shouted, seconded, then another voice, third. The room erupted not in chaos, but in something worse for Karen, consensus. Karen backed away from the podium, not with dignity, not with grace, but like someone who had just realized their entire world was crumbling, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Karen didn't leave the meeting that night, she fled. The moment the vote was seconded and the crowd roared with support, her face drained of color. She tried to speak again, to regain control, but her words came out scattered, incoherent. Her fingers clutched her folder like a shield as she backed away from the podium, muttering, "This is a circus, a witch hunt. None of this is legal." But no one was listening anymore. People had seen the video, the theft of Mike's piece, the tampering with his cameras, the misuse of HOA funds. The power Karen had wielded like a sword, unchecked and unchallenged for years, had finally hit a wall. Mike stood quietly as the interim vote took place. The crowd chose 3 temporary board members on the spot, neighbors who had kept their heads down for years, but now stood tall, energized by truth. Karen didn't stay to witness the decision. She was already gone, retreating to her car under cover of dusk, tires screeching as she sped out of the lot. The neighborhood didn't sleep much that night. By sunrise, Karen's front lawn, the pristine jewel of the block, was littered with discarded notice of violation signs. Her iron mailbox had been taped shut with one of her own red warning labels, unfit leadership, under investigation. Mike didn't put them there. He didn't have to. The community had spoken. Within 48 hours, the county HOA regulatory board received multiple independent complaints against Karen. A lawyer one Mike hadn't even contacted reached out on behalf of 3 residents offering to build a class action civil case. The newly elected interim committee filed for an immediate financial audit, and Karen was formally barred from entering HOA property without written permission. Mike watched it unfold, not with glee, but with something else. A strange, calm. The anger he had felt, the helplessness when Chase wrecked his garden, the fury after Karen twisted the narrative, the humiliation of the phony citations, all of it had transmuted into something cleaner, sharper, resolved. Still, he wasn't naive. He knew Karen wouldn't just vanish quietly, and he was right. That Friday, a letter arrived at his door. No stamp, no address, just tucked into the mailbox like a forgotten flyer. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in bold, blocky font. "You think this is over? Watch your back." No name, no signature, just the threat. Mike looked up at the street. Chase's dirt bike was gone. Karen's car hadn't returned, but someone had still come close enough to shove that note into his box. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. He walked back inside, placed the letter into an evidence bag, and added it to the growing case file he had been building. Not just for civil court, but criminal. Karen had crossed a line. Multiple lines. And the deeper Mike dug, the more he found. Hidden expenses, falsified repair receipts, vendor payments to a landscaping company that didn't exist until he traced the name back to a dummy LLC owned by Karen's brother-in-law. And the best part? The paper trail was clean. Karen had never imagined someone would look that closely. That weekend, the local news station ran a headline, "Neighborhood Revolts Against HOA Tyrant, Secret Spending, Sabotage Uncovered." The reporter knocked on Karen's door. She didn't answer. Instead, she put her house up for sale. Quietly, discreetly. No open house, no listing on neighborhood forums. But Mike knew. The sign went up at 6 a.m. Monday morning. By noon, every neighbor had seen it. She was running. But what she didn't know was Mike wasn't done yet, because what he uncovered next would turn her escape plan into a legal nightmare. Karen had always believed she was untouchable. She controlled the HOA, ran the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom, and intimidated anyone who dared to challenge her. But for the first time in years, Karen had lost control and she was scrambling. The for sale sign was her silent surrender, but Mike knew better. He could see it in how she parked down the street instead of her driveway, how the curtains in her living room, once always open, were now clamped shut. She wasn't just leaving, she was retreating, but not before trying to cover her tracks. Too late. Mike had spent the last 3 days combing through every transaction the HOA had made under Karen's tenure. With help from the newly appointed interim board, he gained access to all records, digital and physical. Most of it was dull, repetitive maintenance costs, and vendor agreements. But buried deep inside an old quarterly summary, Mike found something that made his pulse quicken. An invoice from a construction contractor for work done on HOA clubhouse storage improvements. It looked routine until he checked the permit with the county building office. There was no permit, no record, no inspection report. According to city records, the HOA clubhouse hadn't had any work done in the last 3 years. So, Mike called the contractor. What he found made his blood run cold. The company wasn't a real contractor. It was a shell business registered in the name of Karen's niece. The invoice faked. No materials ever purchased, no labor ever logged. The payment transferred directly to a private bank account just 4 days after Mike had initially confronted Karen about Chase's vandalism. It wasn't just corruption anymore, it was fraud. Mike sat in silence, staring at the transfer records the contractor had unknowingly verified over the phone. The numbers matched the HOA budget line for line. This wasn't just shady behavior, this was criminal. He made copies, dozens of them. Then he made a call. Detective Vargas, the officer originally dismissive during Mike's first complaint, had since heard from more than a few other residents. He was beginning to realize this wasn't just a neighborly spat, it was a full-blown case. When Mike showed him the payment trail and the fraudulent invoice, Vargas didn't brush him off this time. His tone turned serious. "You're saying she embezzled HOA funds into a fake company run by a relative?" the detective asked. Mike nodded. "And that's just the first one. I've found 3 more entries that smell exactly the same." Vargas let out a low whistle. "You just opened a very big door." That night, as if on cue, Karen showed up on Mike's porch. No announcement, no warning. Just her car idling on the curb and her silhouette standing under the porch light like a ghost. Mike opened the door slowly. "I didn't come to argue," she said, voice low. "Then why are you here?" Mike asked. Karen's eyes were dark, swollen from what looked like hours of crying. Her voice cracked. "I just wanted to ask, can we settle this quietly? Before this goes too far?" Mike looked at her for a long time. "You ran me through the dirt. You let your kid destroy my home. You threatened me, tried to turn the neighborhood against me. And now, after all that, you want quiet?" Karen didn't reply. She just stood there, defeated. "I'm not doing this for revenge anymore," Mike said. "I'm doing it because people like you don't stop unless someone stops you." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. She turned, walked back to her car, and drove away into the darkness. The next morning, she was served with a criminal subpoena, and Mike Heat showed up to the next HOA meeting, not as the angry homeowner but as the new interim board president. 6 weeks after Karen was served, the neighborhood looked different. The tension was gone. People smiled again. Kids played in the cul-de-sac without being barked at over helmet violations or noise curfews. The HOA board meetings, once cold and dictatorial, had become open discussions. Ideas flowed. Votes mattered. Homeowners, once fearful of citations for mailbox flags and lawn colors, now breathed freely, and at the center of it all stood Mike. He hadn't planned on being the HOA's new president. He never wanted the title, but after the fallout, the residents unanimously asked him to take the reins, if only to finish what he started. Karen was nowhere to be seen. After being formally removed from the board, she vanished from neighborhood life. Her house sat quiet, blinds drawn. Her luxury SUV hadn't moved from the driveway in days. Word had spread that she was under investigation not just for embezzlement, but also for fraud and falsifying community documents, charges that carried serious jail time. The payments made to shell companies were now part of an active criminal case. Her niece had been subpoenaed. Her accounts were frozen, the walls were closing in, but Karen still hadn't left. And Mike knew why. She was stalling, hoping she could sell the house before the damage fully hit, hoping that if she moved fast enough, she could disappear before the system caught up with her. Then the twist happened. One morning, a for sale sign appeared in her yard again, but this time something was different. It wasn't posted by a traditional real estate company, it was a foreclosure notice. Karen hadn't told anyone, but she had refinanced the house twice in the past 2 years to cover the lifestyle she flaunted. Spa visits, renovations, private vacations, all underwritten by HOA reimbursements and personal debt. When the reimbursements stopped, so did her ability to pay the loans. Her kingdom wasn't just falling, it was being reclaimed. 3 days later, the house was empty. Karen left in the middle of the night, quietly, without so much as a word to her few remaining allies. She didn't wave goodbye. She didn't hold a yard sale. She didn't even take all her belongings. Mike stood on the sidewalk the next morning, sipping coffee as a moving van drove away, half full. The back doors flapping weakly in the wind. She was gone, but the final twist was still coming. That afternoon, a man in a suit knocked on Mike's door. He introduced himself as a regional investigator working with the district attorney's office. He handed Mike an envelope. "This is a formal notice of restitution," the man said. Karen agreed to a plea deal. "Part of it includes a public apology letter and repayment to the HOA and to you directly." Mike opened the envelope and read the statement. It wasn't handwritten, but it was official. Stamped, signed, it admitted to wrongdoing, fraud, misuse of authority, and it included a cashier's check made out in his name for the exact value of his destroyed koi pond and garden. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the line at the bottom. "I acknowledge that my actions were not only unlawful, but unjust. I misused my power. I deeply regret targeting Mr. Mike Reynolds and understand the full consequences of my decisions." Mike folded the letter, slid it back in the envelope, and smiled. He walked into his yard, his new koi pond already rebuilt, his maple tree replanted and let the wind carry. The moment he hadn't just rebuilt a garden, he'd rebuilt a community. When bullies like Karen try to rule with fear, All it takes is one person to stand up, dig in, and fight back with truth. Because even the loudest tyrants can't silence the power of a neighborhood united. The end.